She left meals for a homeless veteran every night. She never asked for anything in return, just wanted him to eat. Maria Alvarez was a cook in a small Kentucky town, working long hours to keep her family's diner afloat. David Brooks was a quiet man in an alley nearby, a veteran who'd lost everything. One evening, Maria's small act of kindness brought the Army to her door, and everything changed. What made the Army honor them? Why did they show up? Have you ever helped someone without expecting a reward? Let's find out. Welcome to True Quiet Stories. Let's uncover what happened in this story. In a small Kentucky town, winters are harsh. Maria Alvarez lived there. She was 42 years old. She worked as a cook at Alvarez Diner, a small family restaurant on Oak Street. Maria's days were long. She flipped burgers, baked pies, and scrubbed pots. Her hands were rough from years of work. She smiled for customers, even when her feet ached, even when the bills piled up, even when the weight of keeping the diner open felt too heavy. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, her apron stained with grease, her eyes tired but warm. Maria lived with her two daughters, Sophia and Isabella, in a small apartment above the diner. It was a cramped space with peeling wallpaper, a leaky faucet, and a heater that barely worked. Her husband, Carlos, had passed away 5 years ago from a heart attack, leaving Maria to raise her girls alone, to keep the diner running, to hold her family together in a town that seemed to move on without her. Maria kept going. She worked hard, but she had a kind heart. She gave kindness. It was all she could afford. Maria's life in Bardstown, Kentucky, was a daily struggle. The town had seen better days. Its streets were lined with faded signs, its shops struggling to stay open, its people worn by hard work and dreams deferred. Bardstown was a small community, just over 13,000 people, a place where everyone knew everyone. The diner on Oak Street had been a fixture for decades, a spot where families gathered, stories were shared, and memories were made. Maria's parents had built it, and she had inherited it, fighting to keep it alive even when the odds were against her. She grew up in Bardstown, in a small house on Cedar Lane, where her parents raised her with love and faith. Her father, Miguel, had been a cook, his hands steady as he flipped tortillas on the griddle, his voice warm as he sang old Mexican songs. Her mother, Rosa, had been a waitress, her smile a comfort to every customer, her prayers a nightly ritual. They didn't have much money, but they had each other, and that made their small house a haven, a place where Maria always felt safe, always felt loved. Those memories were all Maria had left after Carlos died. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, his laughter silenced, his warmth gone, a void she couldn't fill. She was 37 then, Sophia just 10, Isabella only 6. Their small faces were pale with grief, their small hands clinging to hers, their small voices asking questions she couldn't answer. Maria took over the diner alone, working from dawn to midnight, her hands rough from scrubbing pots, her back aching from standing all day, her heart heavy with loss. Sophia and Isabella helped when they could, clearing tables after school, washing, dishes on weekends, their small hands quick, their small smiles brave, their small hearts a reminder of the love that kept Maria going, even when the world was cold, even when the nights were long, even when the struggles were heavy. But Maria had a kind heart, a heart that still beat with the lessons her parents taught her, with the love she'd shared with Carlos, with the hope she had for her daughters. She cooked with care, taking pride in the meals she served, making sure every plate was warm, every bite comforting, every customer cared for, a quiet gift to the people who filled her diner, even if they never noticed, even if they never thanked her, even if they never saw the effort she put in, the love she poured into every dish, the heart she gave to every meal. Every night before closing the diner, Maria would take the day's leftovers, half a burger, a slice of pie, a bowl of soup, and wrap them in foil. Her hands were steady as she prepared the meal, her heart heavy as she thought of the man in the alley, the man she'd seen so many times, the man she couldn't ignore, the man she couldn't let go, hungry, the man she couldn't let go unloved, even if she didn't know his name, even if she didn't know his story, even if she didn't know the weight he carried. The man's name was David Brooks, though Maria didn't know that at the time. He was 65 years old, a veteran of the Gulf War, a man who'd served as a sergeant in the U.S. Army, who'd led his squad through the deserts of Kuwait in 1991, who'd seen things he couldn't unsee, who'd done things he couldn't undo, who'd lost things he couldn't reclaim. He'd been a hero once, a man who'd saved his squad during a night ambush, dragging wounded soldiers to safety under fire, his own body scarred by shrapnel, his own heart scarred by the screams of the men he couldn't save, by the faces of the friends he'd lost, by the guilt that followed him home. David had lost everything after the war: his family, his home, his peace, his sense of self. He'd come home to Bardstown in 1993, a different man than the one who'd left. His eyes were harder, his smile gone, his heart heavy with the things he'd seen, the things he'd done, the things he couldn't undo. His wife, Ellen, had tried to help, her gentle hands a comfort, her soft voice a lifeline, her love a beacon in the darkness that had consumed him, that had changed him, that had broken him in ways she couldn't fix, in ways he couldn't share, in ways they couldn't survive. But the nightmares were too much, the flashbacks too real, the guilt too heavy, the PTSD too strong. It pulled him under, pulled him away, pulled him apart, until Ellen couldn't hold on anymore. She left with their 2 children, a daughter named Emily and a son named Michael, taking them to Louisville, hoping to give them a better life, a safer life, a life without the shadow of a man who couldn't find his way back, who couldn't find his peace, who couldn't find his home. David didn't blame her, didn't fight her, didn't beg her to stay. He knew she was right, knew he was broken, knew he couldn't be the husband she deserved, the father they needed, the man he'd once been, the man he'd never be again. David had been living in the alley behind Alvarez Diner for 3 years, a makeshift shelter of cardboard and tarp, a thin blanket his only warmth, a cracked flashlight his only light, a small tin box his only possession. Inside the box was a faded photo of Ellen and the kids taken on Emily's 5th birthday, their smiles bright against a sunny park backdrop, a moment of joy frozen in time, a moment David held on to, a moment that broke his heart, that kept him alive, that kept him hoping, even if he didn't know why, even if he didn't know how, even if he didn't know what for. There was also a letter Ellen wrote him during the war, the paper yellowed, the ink faded, but the words still legible, words of love and hope that had kept him going through the darkest nights, words he read when the loneliness felt too heavy to bear. And there was his Bronze Star, a medal he'd been awarded for his heroism in Kuwait, a medal he'd buried in the box, a medal he couldn't look at, a medal that felt like a mockery of the pain he carried, of the lives he couldn't save, of the man he'd once been, a man he'd lost, a man he'd never be again. Maria first noticed David on a cold evening in December 3 years ago as she took out the trash after closing the diner. Her hands were numb from the chill, her breath fogging in the air, her heart heavy with the weight of the day. She saw him sitting in the alley, his body hunched against the cold, his thin blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his eyes downcast as he stared at the ground, his face etched with lines of hardship, of sorrow, of a life that had left him with nothing, a life that had taken everything. Something about him made her stop, a sense of recognition in the way he carried himself, a quiet dignity despite his circumstances, a strength that shone through the hardship that clung to him like the frost on the ground, a strength Maria understood, a strength she felt, a strength she couldn't ignore. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, didn't know the weight he carried, but she knew the look in his eyes, the look of a man who'd lost everything, the look of a man who needed kindness, who needed love, who needed hope, even if he didn't ask for it, even if he didn't expect it, even if he didn't believe he deserved it. That night, Maria went back inside, her hands trembling as she wrapped a plate of leftover meatloaf in foil, her heart heavy as she thought of the man in the alley, as she thought of the cold, as she thought of the hunger she knew he felt, the hunger she'd felt, the hunger she couldn't let go unanswered. She walked back out, her steps slow, her breath fogging in the air, her hands steady, as she placed the plate on the ground beside him, as she nodded to him, as she walked away. Her heart a little lighter, knowing she'd done something good, something right, something that mattered, even if no one else saw, even if no one else cared, even if the world kept moving on without her, without him, without them. For 3 years, Maria left meals for David every night, a small act of kindness that became a ritual, a quiet promise between two souls who'd never spoken, who'd never needed to, who understood each other in the way only the lonely can, in the way only those who've known hunger can, in the way only those who've been forgotten can. Sometimes it was a slice of pie, sometimes a bowl of soup, sometimes a burger that hadn't sold. But always it was warm, always it was comforting, always it was given with love, with care, with a kindness that David hadn't known in years, that David hadn't thought he deserved, that David hadn't thought he'd ever find even in the alley, even in the cold, even in the silence that had become his home. David would take the food with a nod, his hands trembling as he held the foil, his eyes downcast as he ate, his heart a little lighter, his hunger a little quieter, his loneliness a little softer, knowing someone cared, even if he didn't know her name, even if he didn't know her story, even if he didn't know the weight she carried. Maria's act of kindness went unnoticed by most, a silent gesture in a world that rarely stopped to see the quiet heroes, the ones who gave without asking for anything in return, the ones who loved without expecting love back, the ones who kept going even when the world didn't care. But one person did notice, a person who saw more than most, a person who knew the power of a kindness unseen. Her name was Emily Brooks, a 35-year-old woman who'd grown up in Louisville, who'd spent years searching for her father, who'd never stopped hoping, who'd never stopped loving, who'd never stopped believing she'd find him, even if he'd disappeared, even if he'd broken, even if he'd faded into the shadows, into the cold, into the silence that had become his home. Emily was David's daughter, though Maria didn't know that at the time, didn't know the story behind. The woman who walked into the diner one evening, her eyes searching, her hands trembling, her heart pounding with hope and fear, a hope that she'd find her father, a fear that she'd lost him forever, a love that had never faded, even in the years, even in the distance, even in the silence that had kept them apart. Emily had been searching for her father for years, following every lead, chasing every rumor, hoping against hope. She'd grown up with stories of a man who'd been a hero, who'd saved lives, who'd loved her, even if he couldn't show it, even if he couldn't stay. A friend sent her a link to a local news story about a cook in Bardstown leaving meals for a homeless veteran. It included a blurry photo of a man in an alley, a man with a dog tag, a man who looked like her father. Emily drove to Bardstown that evening, her heart pounding with hope and fear. She stepped into Alvarez Diner, her eyes searching, her hands trembling. She saw Maria behind the counter, the alley through the window, and the man who had been her father, her hero, her love, even in the silence, even in the shadows, even in the years that had kept them apart. She walked up to Maria, her voice trembling. As she spoke, her words a whisper, a plea, a hope that had lived in her heart for so long. "Excuse me," Emily said, her voice breaking with emotion, with the weight of the years, with the love that had never faded. "I think you've been helping my father." Maria froze, her hands trembling as she held a plate, her eyes wide, as she listened to Emily's story, as she realized the weight of what she'd done, the weight of the meals she'd left, the weight of the kindness she'd given, the love she'd shared, even if she'd never known his name, his story, the man he'd been, the hero he'd been, the father he'd been. Emily called her brother Michael that night, her voice trembling with joy. Michael drove to Bardstown the next morning, his heart pounding as he parked outside the diner, his eyes searching as he stepped inside, as he saw the man who'd been his father. They walked to David, their steps slow, their hands trembling. As they knelt beside him, as they spoke his name, as they brought him back, after all these years, after all the silence, after all the shadows that had kept them apart. David looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief, his hands trembling as he touched their faces, as he felt their warmth, as he heard their voices, as he realized the love that had found him, the family that had returned, the kindness that had brought them here. Maria's kindness, a kindness he'd never expected, a kindness he'd never thought he deserved. He cried, his tears falling freely, his heart breaking and healing in the same moment, his voice a whisper. "Emily, Michael," he said, his voice breaking with the weight of the years, with the love that had found him, that had brought him home. The news spread fast, the story of Maria and David reaching every corner of Bardstown, a tale of kindness, of love, of a family reunited, of a hero remembered. A local journalist, Sarah Klein, wrote about it in the Bardstown Gazette. Diner cook's kindness reunites veteran with family. The story caught the eye of a retired Army colonel in Louisville, Colonel James Harper, who'd served in the Gulf War, who'd known men like David, who'd seen the toll war took on those who fought it. James read the story, his heart pounding with awe and urgency, his mind racing with memories of the war, of the heroes he'd known. He knew he had to act, to honor David, to honor Maria, to honor the kindness that had brought them together. On a Thursday morning, the sound of engines filled the air outside Alvarez Diner, a rumble that shook the windows, that stopped Maria in her tracks, that made her heart pound with fear and curiosity, a sound that spoke of something big, something unexpected. She stepped outside, her hands trembling as she held a dishcloth, her eyes wide as she saw a convoy of Army vehicles pulling up, as she saw soldiers stepping out, their uniforms crisp, their faces serious, their hands raised in salute, a salute for David, a salute for Maria, a salute for the kindness that had brought them here. Colonel James Harper stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd that had gathered. Customers spilling out of the diner, neighbors stepping out of shops, children running from the nearby park. 34 years ago, Sergeant David Brooks saved my squad, he said, his eyes fixed on David, who stood beside Maria, his hands trembling, his eyes wet with tears. In Kuwait, 1991, a night ambush came without warning, gunfire everywhere. I was wounded, thought I'd never make it home. But David dragged me to safety, saved my life, saved our squad, men who lived because of him, who never forgot the sergeant who gave them a future, who asked for nothing in return. He was awarded the Bronze Star, but he was forgotten until a woman with one small act of kindness reminded us what heroism looks like. James turned to David, pinning a new Bronze Star to his jacket, then to Maria, pinning a civilian commendation medal to her apron, honoring the woman who'd given so much, who'd loved so much, who'd changed so much. The crowd erupted in applause, their voices a wave of support that echoed through the street, a sound that chased away the silence that had defined David's life. The Army helped turn Alvarez Diner into a support hub for local veterans, a place where they could gather, share stories, find help. Customers came from all over Kentucky, their smiles warm, their hearts open to Maria, who used the support to fix the diner, to make a home for her daughters, a home that felt safe, that felt loved. David moved to Louisville with Emily and Michael, getting treatment for his PTSD, his heart healing with each day, with each love that filled his life. Every month they returned to Bardstown, sitting in a booth at the diner, their laughter filling the air, their hearts a family that had been healed thanks to Maria, thanks to a town that had finally seen, that had finally cared. Outside the diner, a plaque was placed, a bronze tribute in honor of Maria Alvarez and David Brooks. Kindness can echo louder than words. Spring came to Bardstown, the diner a happy place, the town closer, prouder, more loving. In a world that forgets its heroes, one small act of kindness made a difference. A broken veteran was remembered. A humble cook learned her worth. A community found its heart, Know someone whose kindness changed a life? Share their story in the comments. Type honor if you believe kindness matters. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Quiet Stories for more untold tales of valor. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.